Folks, I'm excited about today's show. It's a first time ever. I don't just welcome one Purple Patch coach to the show. No, we've got three. It is myself, Brad Hunter, Nancy Clarke, and Max Gering. We are doing a show all about race preparation, mindset, nailing your taper, making sure that you're ready to perform. And what you're going to hear over the course of the coming hour or so is some really treasured insights from really some incredibly smart coaches. And it gives you a little peek behind the curtain of Purple Patch. It's not just about me, it's about the team. We operate as a team, we support each other, and we are driven by helping people to improve, no matter what their goals are. And it turns out we've done pretty well at it. I know that I become a better coach because of just this little sample, these coaches that we get to hear from today. And so, if you'd like to become a part of Purple Patch, whether individually coached by one of the coaches here or one of the other coaches on the Purple Patch team, or of course, via our Tri-Squad program in which you get access to all of our coaches, feel free to reach out, info@purplepatchfitness.com. We can set up a complimentary consultation to see if we're the right program for you. Here it is, it's a Coaches Roundtable, Race Preparation. Enjoy the show.
I'm Matt Dixon, and welcome to the Purple Patch podcast. The mission of Purple Patch is to empower and educate every human being to reach their athletic potential. Through the lens of athletic potential, you reach your human potential. The purpose of this podcast is to help time-starved people everywhere integrate sport into life. And welcome to the Purple Patch podcast. As ever, your host, Matt Dixon. And today, we have got a very special show because you find us on location at the Napa training camp. We are actually halfway through this thing. We were 2 days down or 2.5 days down. We've already got some tired puppies that are campers. They've done a very, very big early morning swim. They did a very meaty running session this morning. And we've got a little break. So we thought, you know what? I'm going to take the opportunity here. And some of the coaches that are on site, we're letting Coach John Stevens, who is a prior podcast guest here, he's going to get off the hook, but we thought we'd get four of us together and do a little bit of a coaches roundtable. One of the themes of this camp has been race preparation, not just training for the sake of training, but training for the pursuit of improved performance in our racing. And of course, that includes preparing through taper, mindset, some of the mistakes that can occur, and on and on and on. And we thought, you know what, we've got a lot to share. We're having a lot of discussions, so why don't we get together? So we are very, very lucky today because most of you will recognize Max Gering joining us today. Good morning, Max.
Good morning. Good afternoon. It's good to be back.
Welcome back. It is now good. It is good afternoon. It feels like it's 24 hours a day. And for the first time on the Purple Patch podcast, two more senior coaches with Purple Patch. Young Brad Hunter, welcome.
Thank you, Matt. Pleasure to be here.
Welcome to the show for the first time, Nancy Clarke.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Rock and roll. Well, gang, we're going to do a little bit of a round table here. So hopefully we're all going to contribute. And we're going to go through four main topics, all under the banner of race preparation. Race season is coming. We've already had some great races at the time of recording. The big meaty one that we had a couple of weeks ago was Oceanside, of course. We had a lot of athletes down there racing, a lot of successes. And just earlier this week, we had the Boston Marathon with some cracking performances. I should note of all age levels. And maybe we'll talk about your athlete, Nicole, with her wonderful 3:07 performance that she had down there.
Who got to run with her dad, which is pretty cool. Who's your athlete?
Who got to run with her dad, Pat Romano, who's been on the show. Almost 60 years of age, 3:25. Pretty impressive for young Pat there as well. What we want to do, and I've got my notes here, I want to break this down into four main areas today. The first is taper and preparation. So as we're coming to land the plane into a race, what are some of the things to get right in your taper? What are some of the mistakes that athletes make? And we'll dig in around that. I want to also talk, secondly, about mindset and racing mindset, particularly in flight during the race, and try and unpack some topics around there. Something that I think is really important as well, which is pacing and self-management. So we'll get into that side of it. And then finally, once it's all done and dusted, rather than just going to the beer tent, we want to also talk about post-race reflection a little bit. We might get some bonus takeaways, depend on time as we go. So, Nancy, Brad, Max, fasten your seatbelts. Are we ready to go?
Ready to go?
All righty, let's rock and roll. Let's start. So we're going to start with taper first. And maybe, Brad, I'll start with you on this one. We talk about the taper, and before we hit the magic record button, we're saying it's pretty different than track and field or swimming, those types of races, particularly as we go into longer distance triathlon. What do you think some of the things to get right in a taper are?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind when we start talking about taper is the classic purple patch saying, showing up feeling fit and fresh, not fit and fatigued. So I think when you say land the plane, make sure that you get kind of in the right landing zone at the end. Energy conservation, being able to rebound, collect energy as you're coming into the race is the most important thing, but it can be super challenging as you're doing the taper because it can feel like maybe you're not doing enough, right? It becomes a confidence killer to actually back off and restore energy for 70.3, and especially for an Ironman distance race where it's like you want your energy tank at full when you hit the start line.
It's a funny thing because, and maybe we'll combine this question, what are the things to get right, equally with what are some of the common mistakes as well. But it's a balancing act. You want to retain fitness. And of course, the question that every athlete has is, am I ready?
Am I ready?
Which is an unanswerable question, by the way. You will never feel ready, even when you get ready for a great race. But there's, I think it's such a difficult balancing act for coaches and athletes to really get right, because you want to maintain every element of fitness and hard work that you put in. At the same time, you want to ensure that you are incredibly fresh so that you can up level in many ways.
Yep. And you have to have a bit of faith in the process, which is just faith.
Yeah. One more that comes to mind, both of you are the ones that do all of our bike recordings, and a lot of our race prep sessions, we use the word priming. So I think interesting thing there, which is, yes, you want to conserve energy, but you don't want to feel flat. Yeah. And so you still do a little bit of work. Your total work is going to be a lot less, but there's still some nice bits of work in those, especially the 2 weeks before the race, that you're continuing to maintain your feel for a race pace so that you can go into it feeling confident. Primed is something that I think about, that word primed.
Yeah, but before we got in, we were talking about rhythm a little bit, and I think rhythm's the part of it. I think a big part of a successful taper, if you want to call it that, is not actually changing too much. There's a phrase that we use a lot: performance predictability. So can you get the body to actually up level? And one of the ways to do that is to not change too much, whether we're talking about daily eating habits, whether we're talking about sleep patterns, etc. And of course, when we're talking about rhythm of training. So if your regular cadence of, I swim on Mondays, I bike on Tuesdays, I run on Wednesdays, I think as much as possible, we'd like to try and keep that really familiar. And we're just dialing down the total load. But I think, Max, what you said there is really important, keeping some intensity in there. So if Tuesday tends to be a higher intensity bike, you want to have some intensity. You don't want to rest and just get stale.
I think that's one of the bigger mistakes that athletes will make, right? So we're reducing volume so we can help shed that fatigue for race day. But we also need to maintain some intensity so that we're feeling really sharp. And I think athletes sometimes can either go one way or the other in terms of being afraid to hit some of that intensity. Is it too much? Is it going to make me too tired? No, we want to maintain some of that intensity because we are making that drop in volume.
We had that conversation about an athlete of yours, I think was training for a marathon, right? You pinged me on Slack, and this athlete, strength training was a key part of their training throughout the process, and they also really like it. It makes them feel really confident. And we were talking about, okay, what should that athlete do in their taper phase? And what we settled on was they need that rhythm. They need to keep strength training, because if they stop strength training, they won't feel very good about themselves physically. They won't feel primed, but they need to reduce load. So what we settled on, Nancy and I, was just switching over to a lot of body weight strength training. So their muscles will still feel full and strong, and they'll feel confident, but it just won't create deep fatigue. Right. And that's a good example of how to balance that, keep the rhythm, but reduce the intensity / volume.
I'll say something that is unscientific, but maybe easily understandable: body memory a little bit. And I think as we go longer in racing, I think this becomes a really important factor. I see a lot of athletes over resting, particularly when it comes to if they're going to go and do an Ironman. And 3 weeks out, they think, I've got to taper now. And they go into lethargy mode, and not just with intensity. A week out or 2 weeks out, they think, oh my goodness me, I've got to recover. So therefore, my bike ride's only going to be 90 minutes or 2 hours. And 3 weeks before, it's only going to be 2 or 3 hours. And by the time they actually hit race day, the last time they had anything of duration was a month ago. And I think that, it's not just cognitively, but physically, the body's not familiar with that. So you want to sort of have these, if anything, you keep that rhythm of the big key sessions, and then you really reduce the intensity around it, and you make your moments to activate. And then the throttle is those, as we talk about at Purple Patch, those easier sessions. You can scale back duration even more. You can scale back intensity even more on those, so that it keeps the body really fresh.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing about tapering is that it's really individual. And so when
Yes.
we're working with athletes individually, you know that, I mean, we're always trying to track, okay, what worked well this time? And I know we'll get to those questions down the line,
Yeah.
but it's like some people respond, there is no perfect taper, right?
Yeah.
That's the answer we're saying here is there's no perfect taper. And some people will respond to different things differently. And so tracking that for yourself becomes a really important piece to that puzzle.
I think that's really key. I remember going with the Purple Patch Pros, an athlete. In fact, I'll mention two athletes, Laura Siddle, who we'll all remember, and Sarah Piano. And they were athletes we learned over time that really needed to keep up workload. So it wouldn't be uncommon for Laura to go for a 2 or 3 hour bike ride the day before the race. And it helped her both mentally, and that's a part of it. Ultimately, confidence drives success, whether we're talking about education or race performance, but also physically, she just really responded. On the flip side, someone like Jesse Thomas wanted to sit on the couch and play PlayStation, try and get him out for a couple of days. He's like, I don't want to move my body. And so it is, and I the one thing I'll add to that, just bringing people back, particularly if you're listening as a Purple Patch athletes, the way that we set up our training rhythm throughout the year is in 3-week cycles. And as we move, a little less in off season, but as we move into this part of the year, at recording sort of April into May, have a week of work, a second week of work. That third week that we call transition, we try and set that up as a rhythm of training where we're peaking to have Saturday or Sunday be a kind of a simulator, a challenging day. And that personality of the week, if you want to call it that, is very, very similar to a race week. And I think that physically the body likes familiarity. The mind likes familiarity. So that's the way that we sort of infuse it into it. What about, Nancy, eating and eating habits? I think that, I see two sides of the eating habits, which is, oh my goodness me, it's taper and my workload's dropping, so therefore I need to go on a diet and start reducing, or I'm going to turn into a foie gras goose and start pumping up calories, 10 days out or whatever it might be. So what do you think about it?
And neither one is the correct,
Appropriate.
the appropriate approach there. So just as you were saying, maintaining that rhythm and that predictability, we're not going to make big changes to our diet until just a few days out. And then at that time, we're going to start looking at increasing our carbohydrates, depending upon the distance of the race that we are doing.
Yeah.
Right. That's going to make a big influence on that. But
keep it familiar, yeah.
Still keep protein high,
still
as we
keep
all
protein
love.
high.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, daily protein is a bedrock. And then, the sort of addition to it is if we think about our regular daily eating habits, big protein, plenty of carbohydrates, plenty of vegetables, if we maintain that pattern and our training load is dropping, therefore our resources are going to build. And that's going to prevent us from adding the 2, 3, 4 pounds that makes us feel bloated.
Yep.
At the same time, we're restoring energy and we're fully, and then we can ramp up. And there is some credit to 48 hours, 72 hours before, particularly as we're going longer in the duration races, to start adding greater
Carbohydrates into the mix.
Yeah.
And that's, the important thing there is making sure they're eating good, simple carbohydrates like plain white rice, bread, pasta. That's where you want to make sure you're putting those into your system to top off glycogen.
I want to think about mindset and the taper a little bit. We're going to go into a whole thing on mindset, but reducing cognitive load in that last week. You travel to your race, and those last 48 hours can be chaos. You've got to register. You've got to make sure your bike's working. You've got to do the training that's necessary. You're traveling, etc. So, what are some of the things that you talk to your athletes about in that last, not just in the last sort of 48 hours before the race when they're at race site, but in the 10 days before, some of the tools and tricks to help people reduce cognitive load and keep it simple? I'm going to go to you first.
Oh, me first. So one of the things that I think is super beneficial to get people set up on is working through a timeline of the really, really busy stuff for when you land at race site, right? So you land, you're there, and you're that's where your brain flips over, and you go through and work a good structured agenda or itinerary for yourself that you can handwrite in a journal, right? Actually take the time to say, this is where I need to be on race morning. This is when my check-in is. Write all that down, handwrite it, and let your brain process through that, because then that becomes a nice framework that you've already put into your brain ahead of time, and that you can go through and visualize then once you're on race site as well, right? But putting some of that out of your head and knowing that you've got everything under control because you wrote it all down ahead of time and you have that kind of built in, I think that's super helpful in terms of navigating some of that cognitive overload going in.
I think you can build on that earlier in the week, right? Especially when you start to see athletes spin and get nervous about all the things that they need to think about, and when do they pack their bike, and after what workout, and what do I need to take, and should I take this, and they're looking at the weather. But taking that same approach and taking 15 minutes a day and putting it in your calendar, blocking out that bit of time. And during that time, you can think about whatever you need to think about. You can make those phone calls to the hotel. You can figure out, I'm going to pack my bike on this day. I'm going to do XYZ on this day. And then after that, you're done for that day, that 15 minutes you set aside, and then you go on with the rest of your life.
I think that's a great, I love how you sort of put it in a box in a way, so it's time bound, because it can become overwhelming. We always talk about races as, by the time, particularly if you've got a little bit more of a grinding personality, and it's something that's exciting and it's a big moment, and it's like, it's like going to a big concert or something, and here it comes. And so often you wait for New Year's Eve, and it's going to be a big, huge night. By the time New Year's Eve comes, you're like, I just want to go to bed, But that happens, I think. Yeah. And I think what both of you guys say there is it creates a framework and a structure, and it allows control. I can't tell you how many athletes I know that, and the most perfect arena for this is the Hawaii Ironman, where there's so much going on. By the time they're at the start line, they're exhausted, mentally and physically. Not just physically, because they've been out in the sun out there. And so much of it is because of making things random and almost getting pinballed around. We were doing hill repetitions yesterday, and I talked a lot to the group around navigating up this hill, and we were seeing as coaches that the hill was controlling them, almost like a boat bobbing around the water. Said, take control of the hill, so try and actually use the grade change to get greater speed. I think that applies to a taper at race site. Take control of it, get structured and organized so that you can get predictability, and therefore you can carve in some rest as well.
Totally. And so the thing that brings to mind, I'd love to hear the coaching roundtable's thoughts on this, because we're not coaching professionals. Most of the athletes that we're coaching into races are time-starved, busy professionals, or busy in some form or fashion. And part of navigating race week is also, how much are you working? How are you clearing the decks of work stuff? Or do you advise people to try and shut down on email ahead of time, which is like, you could suggest that to some folks, and it's literally the most shocking thing. So what do you guys do in terms of trying to help people set themselves up around work and being able to focus on the race once they've arrived at the race?
I think it goes back to what you're saying in the beginning of everything being really individual, and everything all of you just said. I think as coaches, our job is to help athletes navigate the unknown. Even if you've done 10 Ironmans, you've never done your 11th Ironman. So every experience we coach our athletes through is helping them navigate the unknown and having them write down things and create a timeline of what they're going to do on site once they land at their race location. We're helping them get things out of their head, put it on paper, and that reduces anxiety, because when you work to create known amongst the unknown, control what you can control, you have a reduction of stress and anxiety. And so I think the same thing with those work schedules, it's you add that to the list of the things that they're working through in taper week. So depending on what's, athletes may be traveling the week of the race, they may be traveling from work to the race, whatever it may be. And so just adding that to the list of things that you help them map out and work backwards from is the answer. And there isn't one right approach. I think in general, if someone can shut off email, if someone can focus a little more on themselves and that helps them, then that's great. But going back to your athlete that wanted to play PlayStation, maybe another athlete, an athlete wants to be distracted. So maybe they want to be answering emails for work. Maybe they want to be doing some stuff to get their mind off of the race. So they'll just sit around in their hotel room and stew over what they're about to do. So I don't think there's a one size fits all approach to it.
I agree with that. I will say, I think my best analogy I can come up with on athletes getting ready for racing is actually coaches getting ready for a training camp. So we're all here, and in many ways, this is our race because it is absolutely all-consuming. We have to be at our very best, and there's a whole bunch of stuff out of our control. And at the same time, we've got a bunch of athletes that we're coaching, and we've got all of our responsibilities at Purple Patch, which vary amongst all of us. So we do prepare. Last week, we were getting ready for this week, not just the logistics of this camp, but we were training ahead. We were maybe taking some extra calls last week. We were communicating to our athletes that were out of pocket and will be restricted, so that here we do the really important work with maybe athletes that are running into trouble or got some, and I had to go to a couple of meetings here, etc. But it's not a tidal wave of work where we're trying to just maintain a regular work week and add this on. Yeah. And we have got as a team, and adding John here that's not the show, but we've got better and better and better at that I see as a coaching team over the last 4, 5, 6 camps. We are wholly present for the athletes, and we are able to perform our best because of what we did over the last 2 weeks, being prepared and talking through this camp, very designated times, but removing it outside of that. So I want to move on because we've got a lot of topics to go through, and I think that's some really good stuff. I want to move to framing success a little bit, so I want to shift into mindset. Do we have a brain mechanic on this show? For listeners that don't know, Max has a master's degree in performance psychology, so step up to the podium. We should put a bright sprite and we can just sit back and relax. In fact, as we sit here, graciously hosted by Joel and Sarah. Joel got wines. Nancy, get the wine because Max is speaking. So thank you very much. But let's talk about race day mindset a little bit. And I've got a few questions here that I want to go through. And I guess the first one is defining athlete success on race day. And this is as we're going into a race. It is so easy for athletes of all level to define success purely in terms of either time. I've been X hours in an Ironman, I need to go faster. So PRs, obviously, placement, qualification, pass, fail. When we're coaching our athletes, how do we talk to them about defining success? How do we try and put their mind space leading into a race so that we can get the very best performance out of them? I'm going to put you on the spot. I put Barry on the spot first last time, so I'm going to lead you in.
I think it starts with way before taper, way before the race. If you're just talking about that 2 weeks prior to the race, you're not doing a good job as a coach, in my opinion. We recently had a checkpoint within our Purple Patch ecosystem with athletes called ARC, so assessment, reflection, and checking in. And it really even starts at those moments, having open communication with your athlete. What are your goals? What's your why? What are you working towards? Why are you engaging in the sport of triathlon or running marathons? And then based off of that, you can start to have the conversation of what does success look like in this race? Because if an athlete, for example, is starting to get caught up in the time, but 3 months prior, you had several conversations about their why is their family and to be a better leader at work, you need to go back to that and say, hey, remember the conversations we had? It's not about whether you finish in 5.5 or 5 hours and 45 minutes. you have other goals that we're working towards, and this race is a part of that picture. So I think framing what success looks like in the race starts with getting clear with your athletes on their goals, on their why, prior to engaging even in the race build. And then you can move forward, and you can then within the race start to break down specific goals that they want to accomplish within the race. And that's going to depend on what the race is. Is it an A race or is it a B race? Maybe there's some more process-driven goals of something specific to a specific discipline. So there's a lot of context there, but I think it starts prior is my initial bird's eye view answer.
I have a lot to say, so I'm going to
Yeah.
let you go.
I think it's okay to say, I want to see if I can hit the podium.
Yes.
I think it's okay. I want to try and break 5 hours for the first time. I think it's okay to have those goals. But I also think it's really important that we don't get shackled to that expectation, right? Yeah. On both sides, right? Don't be limited by what your potential could be, and don't sell yourself too short. So,
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here. I'm so glad you said that, because let's not lose sight of the fact that winning is really fun. You know, whatever your version of winning is, and it is really important to have really lofty, really ambitious goals. To be like, yeah, I do want to qualify, or I do want a podium, or I do want a PR, etc. And I also want to give my scope to, if my mythical time that I want to go is under 5 hours and a half Ironman, that actually you can go 4:40 maybe, you know, like you want to be free to absolutely smash it at the same time. And so when I like to have those discussions first and be like, yeah, like that's really, and make it exciting, but then I'll say, okay, how do we get there? And because the truth is that all of those things are still ultimately outputs, you know, they're end results. And so much can happen and will happen in the chaos of racing. So that is a aspiration, that is a goal, that is something that is going to keep us going when things get really tough. Now let's focus on the inputs that are going to get you there. And let's define that. And I always like to talk to athletes about two things. The first is a commitment, and it's not a motivation, it's a commitment that when the gun goes off and they're at the start line, no matter what happens over the course of the day, the one way to guarantee that you can get pride, satisfaction, and learning is to remain committed to get from A to B as fast as you can. That is a commitment. That's the important thing. It's not a desire. So you got to get that to the depths of yourself, no matter what happens, flat tires, mechanicals, legs feel bad, cramping, etc. That's your first commitment. And then the second thing is, what are the actions, what are the inputs necessary for you to go around your pacing, your fueling, your management stuff to lead you to then the best result of the day? That's a stepping stone. That's what I have with mindset.
My point, I completely agree with both of you. My point, I think it goes back to that. In the beginning of a build, you need to know if the athlete wants to hit a certain time. You need to know their lofty, ambitious goal, because then you can hold them to the standard. I think athletes go into races really anxious and not confident because they say they have one goal, but they haven't had the inputs.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to qualify, well, there's a standard that you need to hold in your training to be able to qualify. And if you haven't done that in training, well, then maybe going into the race, you need to set expectations. So I think part of it is based on what's happened in the athlete's life going into the build, helping them set some really realistic expectations based off of where they are going into that race.
Yeah.
And if they're really fit and if they've managed to have a good build and if they're primed, then yes, it's like, let's get really nitty gritty about, we're trying to hit specific paces in the run. We want to bike in a certain time and really get detailed about the race. And for athletes that are on the other end of the spectrum, they may need a little bit more broad stroke goals for how they want to feel at different points in the race and some less metric driven race goals.
How do you help athletes avoid being derailed by things that are out of their control? So weather, logistical challenges, equipment challenges, competition is one. People get distracted. How do you focus on that?
It's a trainable. That mindset approach is trainable, and so that's something you should be thinking about week by week. during training sessions, when you're stuck out on weekends, whenever you're doing your hard work. Again, we have tons of time-starved athletes in Purple Patch. We can talk about it a lot. And one of the hallmarks of being a time-starved athlete is that your training week rarely goes as planned. And so in and of just navigating your training week by week and having to go with the flow about that perfect rhythm that we've already said we really want to see, rarely does that happen, I think, for a lot of athletes. Just how you navigate that week in, week out sets you up to then navigate that same type of uncertainty and unpredictable conditions that you can arrive at on race day, right?
And perhaps this is a slightly different point, but you talked about uncertainty and training opportunity, because ultimately race day performance is really just an expression of your preparation. Yeah. So let's talk about, if we can get, for a triathlete, for example, your best swim training session, your best bike training session, your best run training session in a single day, that is a dream race performance. Like that's really what is it, just an expression. But it comes back, even yesterday at this training camp, one of the things that we really realized, we were doing a bunch of hill repetitions on the bike, and a lot of people were struggling. They were, by definition, as we love to do here, out of their comfort zone. You had one particular athlete that was very much out of her comfort zone. And we realized she wants to do an Ironman this summer. And we realized, okay, in that Ironman, she is going to be incredibly uncomfortable, and she is going to go through, we can promise her, very dark times. And it was the most powerful experience for her, because she didn't turn her back on yesterday. She lent into the exposure with your coaching, and she really grew. So training is an opportunity to actually get the mind ready for racing in many ways.
Yeah. Well, in your in that particular situation yesterday, there was a lot of, I can't do this. I can't do this. I think I need to stop. But it's changing that narrative in your head. What if I can? What happens if? And that's a pretty powerful change to see what can happen. And sure enough, she got up that hill, confidence swells.
Joy
Swells.
Yep.
Yeah.
Confidence builds.
Yep. You just get stronger. What else can I do now? And it builds on itself.
That was really interesting, because I thought for sure that that this athlete would maybe pull back from today's run. She was there. She leant in. She did her longest run of the year so far.
Yep.
Her best run
Leaned
of the
in.
year so far.
Yeah.
Walked away with a smile on her face.
Exactly. So training is the proving ground in many ways. Not the pass or fail, but it really can build confidence. So getting out of your comfort zone. I can guarantee you this, that she wouldn't have done that by herself. That was the power of a training camp in many ways, which I know that we're off topic a little bit. But I want to talk about one thing in particular that I think is an important mindset for many Ironman athletes, particularly because the Ironman is a beast. It's, swim 2.4 miles, ride 112 miles, at least the last time I checked. And I think you got to run a marathon at the end of it. It's a long day for anyone. And particularly for athletes that are not podium finishers in this. The vast majority of people that are, let's call it just above 10 hours. Anything above 10 hours for an Ironman. And if you're going 11 hours, it's very respectable and very good. 12 hours, fantastic. When I think about Ironman racing, I think a good little nugget for listeners to take away is people struggle in Ironman with pacing. It's very difficult to get right, and you're stringing together 3 different sports. And I think one of the biggest causes of blow-ups is people getting into too much of a racing mindset in an Ironman. So one of the very simple things is, if you go and train all day without blow drying your hair and without taking a huge break, but if you just consistently go and train all day in the swim, it's probably your best racing performance. I think that's just a really good mindset to frame. And someone that I used it with was PlayStation boy Jesse Thomas, who had was one of the best half Ironman athletes in the world, had never done an Ironman, had a tough half Ironman when it was in Austria. I can't remember the year, but I threw him into an Ironman 2 weeks later with no training in Wales. So he stayed in Europe. And he said, I am not ready for this. I don't do Ironman. I said, just go and train all day. And then if you get 4 miles from the finish, you can race. And did that, and he won the race. But he really committed, and he said, I just went training. And of course the output was good because it depressurized. So I think putting things under control, again, it comes back to that, is really, really important.
One thing about pacing, before this I had a call with an athlete who's racing Ironman Texas this weekend, and I think it's sometimes hard for athletes to conceptualize, athletes that aren't professional athletes, the ones that you coached. And the more advanced the athlete is, the easier it is for them to gauge pacing and zones and their gears and really tap into that feel, that inner animal that we talk about. So one thing that I like to do for athletes that maybe have a hard time with that is help them base their pacing strategy using the race course. So for example, I sat with this athlete on Google Meet, and we pulled up the race course, and we broke the swim, the bike, the run into sections on the map. And you can see, okay, like the swim, you can kind of break it up into 3 sections. The bike is an out and back loop, so you do it twice. And then the run is 3 loops. And we talked about how you can progressively build your pace through the swim, the bike, and the run, so that through each discipline, she's getting progressively faster within each discipline. So it's that training session type mentality, which is you're starting smooth and slow in the swim and building, and then the bike, you're also starting smooth and slow and building, and same for the run. So that's something that I like to do, is match it with the actual race course to make it practical.
Yeah, I mean, we've never spoken about that before. We did that at the Hawaii Ironman the whole time because it's such an important section race. I think the other power of that is a marathon can feel a long way when it's a standalone. A marathon can feel a really long way when you've got concrete legs coming off the bike. But you're taking something that's very hard for the brain to wrap its head around, and you're breaking it down into sections. So that creates projects. And that project suddenly is like, okay, good, and it creates refresh points. And I think that's a really powerful way to think about it in many ways.
So something that we were just talking about, I think you were standing next to me when we were going through the run today. Something we were talking about, pacing. I think it applies to pacing. So we're doing a longer run session today where pacing and progressively building effort was the goal, right? That was the mission of the session. And the thing that we were cueing the athletes around was, this is about speed, efficiency, not necessarily just going harder, right? So especially when you're talking about doing an Ironman race day where it is a beast of a day, the goal is not point A to point B as hard as I can go. It's point A to point B as fast as I can go. And that is efficiency of your energetic resources, right? And so we do a lot, bike sessions and run sessions about using terrain to your benefit and maximizing speed, but even just having that switch of, you have a limited amount of energy, you're applying it over 10 plus hours, which is a really long time, right? Like, how do you make that speed return the best you can without just completely blowing up? And just having that switch when you start to talk about pacing can help a lot of athletes, like you were saying, who are not racing at the red line the entire time, help them start to manage the day and break it down a little bit.
You talked the other day about staying present as well. I think that's a big thing in racing of, not while you're managing your effort over the course of a long period of time, not getting too upset about the length of journey that you have ahead of you, and actually really staying in the moment and building awareness. And I think that's one of the cues of people staying fueled and hydrated, is that they're not getting distracted by what's happened behind the ears, what happened in history. Oh, my swim wasn't as fast as it was. Or, of course, what's coming. Oh, my goodness me, I'm tired at mile 80, but I've still got a marathon to go, for example. So I think staying present is big.
Yeah, I think it's the anchor that allows the athlete to do everything that we've all said. Like everything that Brad, you just said about progressive, and it's not as hard as you can go, but it's about energy efficiency. Staying present allows you to remember that, because it's such a long day. If you don't stay present, everything you think you want to think about in the race, you'll just forget, and it'll go out the window if you're not staying present, because you'll be too distracted. So I think being present is the anchor that allows you to put to practice all the different things that you've trained. And interestingly enough, in Oceanside, I had an athlete that podiumed, but mid-run, she had a horrible mile. Objectively, compared to the rest of her pace, just a terrible mile. And then she pulled it together and continue to have a really good run. I keep telling that story to other athletes I have now, because I think it's a really good point of when you stay present and you don't get ahead of yourself, you don't use any one moment in the race to project how you think the race is going to go.
Yeah.
The athlete that was on the hill with you, same thing. She was getting ahead of herself.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing too, athletes will look down at their watch and go,
Yeah, good, bad, pass,
good,
fail.
bad, right? And then they lose focus. But what they need to do is ignore what's happening here, feel what's happening in here, know what they are capable of.
Yeah. And take action of what's needed.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
that I always, and every sort of champion will tell you how you feel in any moment is no prediction of how you can feel in a mile's time or in 10 minutes time. And quite often, I mean, it's always the thing, if you're moody, if you're grumpy, if you lose focus, if you start to get annoyed and you start to think you're going to fire your coach, it's calories. You know, it's, take sugar, take Coca-Cola, because it is
Somebody
almost a great-
handed out a few Cokes yesterday.
Yeah.
And you go through all the emotions. That's what I tell people, is you're going to go through all of your emotions in a race cyclically. And so don't get so caught up when you feel X, when you feel Y. It will pass, and you may feel happy, sad again, or proud and frustrated. You may feel fast, slow, and just being willing to ride that wave throughout the race, being present in that moment will allow you to push yourself. Otherwise, you're...
And not let it dictate how you respond, right? Like, you got to roller coaster.
The race isn't over until your feet cross that finish line. So stay in it.
I remember after Chelsea Sodaro obviously was a purple patch pro, but after she won the Hawaii Ironman, which was a surprise, not necessarily to her and her coach at the time, but certainly to the world, she wasn't a favourite. And she was over at the house afterwards. It's, you know, very great relationship still. And she said, you know, I had one of those days where I never had a bad moment in the swim, in the bike, in the run. I was just unstoppable all day. I never had any energy crash. I never had anything go wrong. So that's amazing. And you'll never have that again in your life. Like, that was literally lightning strike. No, if like most athletes will never, and in fact, if you spoke to Jan Frodeno and all of his wins from whether it was Olympic, all the half Ironman championships, the Hawaii Ironman, I guarantee you that he went through massive adversity. Every champion has. She had one of those moments, and the next year she had a really tough race, and she was way behind. She had a terrible bike race relative for her, really demanding. And she managed to fight her way back, and I think she got 6th that day. She might have even got 4th, I can't remember. But that day was the day that she probably learnt more and could be equal. Obviously, very proud of winning the Hawaii Ironman. She absolutely should be. But that day, that was just as special, because it would have been so easy. And she stayed in the moment that day. She didn't give up, and she was well off the pace. And I think there are lessons from pros that you can take of like yeah, that's the sort of stuff.
For sure, right? Like the magic days happen once in a lifetime,
Never,
right?
yeah.
Right. So like everyone going in and thinking, oh, my race didn't go the way I planned it. Well, professionals who have dedicated their entire lifestyle around putting together perfect races on a regular basis can rarely get it right. So, you know, like it is part of the sport, and it is part of why we do it, the learning, right? It's all of it. So don't be so upset when that happens.
But I think you can walk away with a lot of pride when you look back on the race and think, did I do everything that I could
Under my control.
under my control?
To the best of my ability.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
That,
Did I give it my
that's
best effort?
the only way that we can actually define pass or failure. It's not by what the outcome is. It's actually, did I do everything under my control to my best of my ability? And if you do, even if you've had a tough day, you absolutely walk away with pride, satisfaction, and opportunity for growth. Because the finish line of any race is not the finish line of our performance journey. And I know it's sort of a tripe thing to say, but I think it's really important to memorize that.
To add one practical thing about what both of you just said, I think when we're coaching athletes, and everybody has their own tendency to have some sort of negative thinking pattern, we all have something that we're working on that we want to not do in race day to help us tap into our potential. It's one thing to say, okay, focus on what you can control. I think it's good to give each athlete an if-then scenario of, if this happens, then shift your mindset to this. Like, how will the athlete actually maintain presence, actually not be out the fight? As you said, the race isn't over till it's over. And so for each athlete, it's going to be different, but helping them pinpoint what their sticking points could be in the race, what they're feeling anxious about, and then giving them something to think about intentionally when their mind starts to wander to the place we don't want it to wander, like helping them bring it back. And that's going to be different for every athlete, whether it's a mantra, whether it's remembering something else, but giving them some, like with self-talk, you want them to have short, clear, concise things to think about that are present focused and action oriented to keep them going.
Yeah, we used to have a saying amongst our athletes of form, fueling, and pacing. And so that's something that you can always remember in any given mile of like, what is the form? So it might be a little bit different for you. It might be like when you're running, keep your arm speed up so your leg speed is up. For me, it might be, well, I run like a sack of potatoes and a donkey dipped in cement, so I've got to stand tall. So whatever my cue is, but there's my form. Fueling, of course, is, okay, checking in. Am I getting grumpy and moody? Do I need sugar? Or am I feeling a bit gurgly? Do I need hydration? So you take that. And then pacing is like, okay, how can I get through this mile at the best pace possible? Do I need to take a walk break? Do I need to increase my pace a little bit more? So that's sort of in many ways what you're talking about. I do want to say, because we're sort of getting into some negative talk on when things go sideways, which I want to go into. But before we just dive into that section, I want to talk about fun and joy as well in racing, because I think that's a really important perspective. Racing for me, well, not racing for me. I don't believe racing should be like you're going on trial, and and I think a lot of athletes fall into that trap of, oh my goodness me, my goals were so important and I could puff my feathers 6 months out, but now it's pass fail. Everyone's going to hate me if I don't do well, and they allow the occasion to bypass them. So joy, playfulness, and it's okay to have fun, isn't it?
That's why you're doing it, right? Yeah. I think for everyone who's not a professional, you have to be like, get anchored back into that when you're going into a race and you feel the anxiety coming up. You have to be like, I remember I'm doing this because I like this sport, because I've put in the time and the training. And so no matter where you're at, you want to make sure that you're staying connected to that, for sure. But it's hard. It's really, really hard. And I think one of the things that's really challenging for a lot of athletes is when you've only got one A race a year, for example. And that, and like a lot of athletes don't have the opportunity. Right? I tell some athletes who are here at this camp, you should just race more, right? Like you're limiting yourself, but we understand that that's not possible for everybody. So then you're putting that one anchor on your calendar every year, and that adds even more pressure to the mix, because it's just that one opportunity to do the thing that you're doing. So it creates distance.
I'll come back. You started with a question before around our moments. We have 4 main moments in a year, plus individually with athletes, but we like to come out and define what success is. And I think that really starts, I love talking about athletes have already succeeded by the time they get to a race because of the journey. And it's absolutely true. Most of the rewards that come are out of the journey. But certainly the lessons you gain, the fitness that you develop, the longevity that will create, most of the memories, in truth, come through the training sessions. And so reminding the athlete of that is really good. And it's a balance, but let's not dilute. Winning is fun, and we still want to chase that. And so there is a happy marriage of that. And then the other thing I'd say is a lot of athletes confuse pre-race priming, the body priming itself, and all the sensations, the nerves of a reason that, like, goodness me, I'm getting nervous, so therefore I must not be ready. I'm getting anxious, so therefore I must be fearful. It's like, no, don't confuse the body getting ready and the absolutely appropriate nerves of coming with a signal you're not ready. And if you go and stand in a waiting room of an Olympic swimming final, there's a lot of nerves in there. There is a lot of nerves, and those athletes are ready. That's what occurs. So you go from there. I want to talk about negative self-talk a little bit, and I want to talk about what happens when things hit the fan, the custard moments. So what do we do? You talked a little bit the other day to me about loudspeakers. You go back to that of it's really normal, I think, for athletes when you're suffering, when you're fatigued, when it feels like the walls are closing in, maybe you're in the middle of a race that feels like it isn't going your way, that you can go dark mentally. And what do you tell your athletes when they're going to that moment?
Yeah, so to put it in perspective for the listener, what Brad said in the beginning about mental skills is really important for everyone to remember is they're trainable. And
Yes.
self-talk is one of the mental skills that we have, how we talk to ourselves. And I think there's lots of ways to split it up, but ways to think about it are my thoughts productive? Are they empowering? Not just because positivity can be hard for some people to
wishy-washy,
grasp.
yeah.
Yeah. So are they empowering? Are my thoughts and the way I'm talking to myself helping me go faster, helping me accomplish my goals in this race, or is it pulling me back and holding me back? And one way to gauge that for an athlete is to have this loudspeaker frame, which is if my self-talk was put on a loudspeaker right now and everybody could hear me around me, the athletes around me, would I be proud of what they hear? And then take that a step further is if, we're at the training camp, so the athlete that was having a hard time going up the hill, if her partner or her teammate were at the training camp with them and she was speaking to a fellow teammate the way she was speaking to herself, would that make her a good teammate? Would that be helping that athlete get up the hill? And that's a very easy way for an athlete to realize, wow, I have a bit of an issue. The way I'm thinking is not productive. No, but that's it sounds intense, but it's the truth. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we've all gone there in different stages outside of sport, and that's why training in sports really, really effective, because we need to do the same thing in our life, in work, and in relationships at home. Is the way we're speaking to ourselves and processing things helping us accomplish our goals. So that loudspeaker frame. And then Nancy, you said something yesterday when we talked about this, using it about like how would you talk to your kid that way?
Right. Yeah,
Very
exactly.
similar.
Well, I think you can practice it not only on race day, but in training, because I know athletes that will get into the pool and will berate themselves, doing their swim workout. And I will ask them, is that the way that you would talk to your child? If your child was swimming up and down the lanes, would you say those same things to them? And all of a sudden they'll take a step back and go, oh, well, you shouldn't be talking to yourself that way. You've really got to change that message and that narrative in your head.
I think as well what you mentioned there, and all three of you sort of mentioned shifting the narrative or being trainable. You do have, you are empowered. We are all empowered to evolve and change. And I think quite often, it's like, oh, this is what I'm like. It's like, no, that's you passing the buck on yourself.
Yeah.
Actually, step into that and grow. Take control a little bit. And I really like what you said there. This is one of the things that is so powerful about sport, is that sport in many ways is the purest crucible of stepping into a place of discomfort, peeking over the edge, as I like to say, into a place you've never been, challenging yourself and having to go through a really uncomfortable experience and hopefully emerging the other side. And when you do that, training and ultimately racing, it actually builds a toolkit that you can apply to anything else in life. And I think that's why so many people that are very busy, that are time starved, that are professionals, really lean into these big challenges, because they realize it's not just about the outcomes. They actually become ultimately a better human being on it. It's pretty empowering.
It's a little more than just sport.
Yeah, it is just a little more than just sport. So let's dive in, because I know we're running on time. We've been going hammer and tongs here, and we've got some athletes that are trying to barge into this.
Roll it in shortly.
They want us. So let's just do 2 minutes here. Post race, and maybe I'll just kick this off, because talking about when should athletes review their race, and that's going to be my first question. But I'm going to just suggest something first, and then I'm going to ask that question. One of the things that I see as a coach is when a race goes wrong, when they don't have a performance, an athlete is always incredibly eager to dissect it to the nth degree to find the answer, the culprit. But interestingly, when a race goes right, they tend to bypass it and be like, it's great, all right, I've got it cracked, and move on. I just think post-race reflection, in fact, reflection globally, end of the week, as we like to do as a part of our Sunday special process, arc moment, so every quarter or post-race, etc. These moments are really important, looking back of what went well, what did I not execute as well as I could have done? Not in a vindictive way, but as a growth opportunity. So what I didn't do as well as I could, and then what do I learn from there? And I think we need to do this equally when things go great, so that we can build on the strengths and make sure that we understand why it went well, and equally when things didn't go well. The question is, what's the right time to do that? It's not in the beer tent afterwards, that's for sure.
For sure. I do like my athletes when they are first done with the race, do a quick hot take, right?
Yeah.
Send me a quick hot take of, the big moments. But then after that, you need to take some time and sit with all of the emotions, either the high highs, because you might have that high, or the low lows, right? You just need to ride that wave for a little bit and sit in those feelings. And then after a few days, maybe a week, maybe 10 days, then let's sit down and dive in to all of those aspects that you just described.
Yeah, we have a process to go through basically with our coaching. We are very lucky as a coaching crew, because we effectively got trained by the head sports psychologists of British Olympic Association. So we went through a whole extensive course on that, and that was the really empowering thing of like, feel the emotions, good, bad, get through those, and not try and suppress them or repress them, and let them swim part of it, and grieve if you need to, and then reflect on that. And I think that's really powerful. I do really like the reminder there of the hot take as well, like how you emotion it, how you're feeling on that, and going from there.
Well, you have to. Like, it's inevitable. There's no way for you to shut down your immediate, like, I did well today, or like, I didn't do well today. That's going to happen. So the important thing is just to know it is going to happen. It's okay. You roll with it, but you don't do any. Like, I always tell athletes, someone who'll do an Ironman and have a good day or a bad day will immediately say, "Oh, I'm never doing that again," or "I'm signing up for one right away." And it's like, hey, let's take 48 hours at least, right? Like, think about it a little bit. So ride the emotional wave, and have a call scheduled, right? So when we're working with athletes, we just say, hey, we're going to do our official, big breakdown debrief in 7 days. Put it on the calendar. And that lets you just have that endpoint to say, okay, we're marching towards that 7 days. I can do what I need to do and ride the roller coaster, as we say, and then, dig in after.
That's key. That giving the athlete that clarity of, we're going to talk about this then, and framing that so they're not.
Or giving yourself that clarity if, you're doing it yourself, right?
Put it on the calendar for yourself as well. I think it's great. It coming back to the success side of things as well, which I wanted to make a point that's suddenly gone through the back of my head. So hopefully, as I'm talking, I can bring it back to the top.
Yep.
Here's what I was going to say. I think it's important, particularly when I think about this, I think about the pro athletes actually that I coach. Is sometimes some of the pros that I was coaching would win a race and it wasn't a great performance. So actually, it's like, no, and so thinking about the athlete, we talked about how it's not tied to outcomes. I had many pro athletes that won races that I was very, very critical of them afterwards. They didn't do everything under their control and to their success, and they won despite themselves in many ways. And I was a very collaborative, supportive coach. I'm not a dictator per se, but we did. And at other times, we had athletes where they didn't win. They had a really tough day. And in fact, I just talked about Chelsea. I wasn't coaching her when she did that, but where it's like, this was fantastic. This is something that's going to actually be a catalyst for growth. And that's sort of part of the reason I think reflection is so important. I also think it's part of the reason that giving yourself a bit of space afterwards to go through those emotions so that you can actually come to clarity and look back objectively is how you march forward and grow.
And the other thing, just to tie it back to the earlier conversation about tapering, your race day or your post-race analysis, not the hot take, but when you actually are breaking everything down, that's not just how you did on race day. That's also the week before, the 2 weeks before, and pulling anything that you changed in that taper to help you identify, okay, I really responded to this thing that we did, or I'd never done extra carbohydrates for 48 hours ahead of time, and that did or did not work, right? You want to make sure you're looking at that with a nice scope as opposed to just being, I crushed it on race day.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, next time I race, I have forgotten it all, and I'm back to the
Oh,
random.
yeah, that's a great point as well,
Yeah.
right? So you always want to make sure you're taking notes. That's something we tell athletes all the time.
team, we look outside. We've got many athletes standing on the grass, swinging their arms in circles. And they are either dancing or I'm not sure. There are also dogs out there, and we've got Coach John out there leading mobility, and he looks very nervous because it's not his real house. But at least it's not me doing it. 2.5 more days of camp. They're doing well so far. We're reporting. All we can say is, thanks very much, guys. Really appreciate your wisdom and your experience, and thank you for halfway through at least having a great camp. We've got some nasty bike rides to come. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be doing some more roundtables with this, but everything you need to know about race preparation and taper. We'll see you next time, and share with your friends and anyone that's got a race coming up that might find this beneficial. Take care. Guys, thanks so much for joining, and thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the new format. You can never miss an episode by simply subscribing. Head to the Purple Patch channel of YouTube and you will find it there, and you could subscribe. Of course, I'd like to ask you, if you will subscribe, also share it with your friends, and it's really helpful if you leave a nice positive review in the comments. Now, any questions that you have, let me know. Feel free to add a comment and I will try my best to respond and support you on your performance journey. And in fact, as we commence this video podcast experience, if you have any feedback at all, as mentioned earlier in the show, we would love your help in helping us to improve. Simply email us at info@purplepatchfitness.com or leave it in the comments of the show at the Purple Patch page, and we will get you dialed in. We'd love constructive feedback. We are in a growth mindset, as we like to call it. And so feel free to share with your friends. But as I said, let's build this together. Let's make it something special. It's really fun. We're really trying hard to make it a special experience, and we want to welcome you into the Purple Patch community. With that, I hope you have a great week. Stay healthy, have fun, keep smiling, doing whatever you do. Take care.